All right. So today we'll be discussing how to bring in S3 into our current processes. So the core assumption is something is being worked on and we are all working together. And while working together, how do we bring in an S3 into that process? So that's what this is about. Um, and it usually starts with a couple of key sub patterns. And the sub patterns are adapt patterns to the context, be the change, invite change, open space for change, continuous improvement of work process. And we'll dive into each of these separately. So let's start with adapt patterns to the context. So to adapt patterns to the context, first thing that we need to do is understand the context in the first place. So we're all working on something. So the context is set. We have a driver which is separate from like the S3 driver. Something's happening. And once we understand the context, what we do is identify tensions. I added this like in the actual S3 pattern, it isn't there. But my core assumption is that tensions are like the human sensor for whatever thing we do. No matter what, every driver is derived from a tension. That's one of the assumptions I made. So first we understand the context of what we are doing. We identify tensions in what we are doing. And then we go through the patterns, just the way we are doing right now. We understand patterns. We look through the whole pattern list, figure out different patterns, and then propose a driver. The driver is basically what we are doing is we are proposing a pattern to implement towards a specific work being done. And then we consent on that pattern. Then we test adaptation, evaluate and evolve, and this keeps continuing. We test, evaluate and evolve, and it keeps going until we hit the sweet spot where uh, at least temporarily we don't have any tensions left. Does anyone have any questions for this section? If not, we can move to the next one, which is things to remember when adapting patterns. So for everyone that would be affected if we adopt a pattern, understand why changing the pattern is necessary. If there are no tensions, then why are we even changing the pattern? Why can't we just keep going the way we are going? So my assumption is that first we identify tensions, and from those tensions, we agree on a driver. Everyone that is affected is present or represented when deciding how to change. So all stakeholders need to have an input. It could either be directly from the individual or there could be a representative in case they're busy or something else. Use S3 principles as a guide for adoption, as in, I mean, this doesn't need much more. We just use like the S3 guide. And then we run experiments with adaptations for long enough to learn about the benefits and any potential pitfalls. So here, when I was going through the guide, I had a couple of questions. How do we decide what is long enough? I think it is like this is something that is not written in stone. So I think the group decides, okay, we'll try consent like 10 times, 20 times, or we'll go through it with 10 different drivers. So this is something that we have to decide as a group and see if it works or not, or if we think we should give it more time. Uh, and then we think about how we evaluate the benefits and pitfalls. So my understanding is that we have retrospective sessions where we talk about what went right and what are the tensions with the current process. And this is after we adopt the plan. How does this sound? Is everyone okay with this, or does anyone have any questions? Okay, we will go to the next one, which is be the change. Behave and act in ways you'd like others to behave and act. Technically, this is like the simplest. It's pretty vague, seems pretty obvious. but when in action, I think this is like the hardest to figure out. So in my opinion, what this means is that, specifically in the context of S3, is that we need to be receptive to tensions brought up by everyone. We can't just sweep attention under the rug and be like, okay, fine, it's over. So tensions, since I think the tensions are the building block of everything, I think these need to be taken very seriously. Use consent and rounds to act on tensions. So we just go around talking about these tensions and use consent and rounds to act on these. Keep a tensions backlog. We need to know, okay, these are the tensions faced by these individuals at this point in time, just so we can go back and later, at a later time, we can go back and see if the process has removed those tensions or if the tensions still persist. And that is the last one. Check in periodically to see if tensions persist and if they should be acted on at a later time. Is all of this, is there anything, any questions at this point in time? If not, we'll move to the next one, which is invite change. So when we are suggesting a pattern to be used, the first thing we need to remember is that we need to invite change as opposed to one person going, hey, we are going to try this out and everyone just has to agree. It's again, it feels like an extension of the consent process where you invite change. When making the invitation, be transparent about the reason for the change. So if we are changing something, that means there are some tensions existing. Otherwise, we don't need to change. Identify the exact tensions being worked on and create a relevant driver for it. Clarify expectation and constraints. So from my understanding, constraints are basically going about resources available. How much time do we have? Are we solving for the tensions or are we deviating? So those kind of things need to be clarified, but this is still pretty vague to me still. Maybe like in a real life example, we would have more clarity.
We have another piece of content on roles and domains and constraints in the context of a domain. Also covers factors like what what's our context that imposes constraints, things that we can't control, and we have to live within those limits.
Got it.
Whether we have staff available for the project or whether there's budget available are classic constraints, but regulatory constraints is another type, and those are all covered in more detail in that other video.
Okay, perfect. And all constraints are, there is no self-imposed constraints, right? These are all external factors. Am I getting that right, Randall?
I think it's possible for any domain to add constraints that maybe come from shared purpose or shared meaning or shared values. Those could be considered constraints as well.
Okay,
Codes of
fair enough.
codes of conduct can be self-imposed.
Correct. Okay, so it could be external or self-imposed. Okay, that makes sense. And the next one is avoid coercion and manipulation. This this I feel like is really hard to identify unless people are willing to speak up. Specifically in a group, if someone has like a stronger voice and pushes specific ideas, then the rest of the group, or at least individuals that feel attention, should speak up. I think that is a way to avoid coercion and manipulation, in my opinion. But I'm open to ideas of how to do it. And after that, we have acknowledge any skepticism and doubts. So for me, skepticism and doubts are another form of tensions. Like I still think skepticism and doubts, uh, if they can be framed in such a way that they can be evaluated at a later time, then I think both of these are very valuable. Skepticism and doubts, I think, is an extension of tensions, but I'm open to other interpretations as well.
That reminds me of the consent process in which concerns, as well as
Mhm.
straight up objections, they feel like the same things as skepticism and doubts. And so when inviting change, the consent process would include those concerns, skepticisms, doubts.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So, yeah. So that is inviting change. And the next one is open space for change. Clarify the driver for change. Like we discussed before, first we need to clarify the driver. What is driving this change? And then we schedule regular open space events. Invite all the members to create and run experiments, define constraints for experiments that enable development of sociocratic and agile mindset, review and learn from experimentation in the next open space. So invite all members to create and run experiments. So this is something that is not very clear to me. Uh, so are we saying the invitation is for members to come propose a driver, or is it like run experiments parallelly? Which I'm not too sure, but my understanding at the moment is instead of just one person proposing uh, process changes, we invite people to propose process changes based on their experiences and tensions. That is my understanding of this one. Define constraints for the experiments that enable development of a sociocratic and agile mindset. This again feels like something we discussed here. Clarify expectations and constraints is what I'm getting from this. So we are defining the constraints, whether it be internal or external constraints or self-imposed constraints.
You're
Um,
describing a kind of a cultural perspective on creating change as we bring in S3 to an org. And something you said right at the top of the context where you're already doing some mission together. And
Correct.
that context suggests an interpretation for your question or uncertainty about members being welcome to create and run experiments, that those experiments would probably be run in the context of getting what you're trying to get done, and
Correct.
not so much necessarily running experiments of playing with possible ways to use S3. I mean, not that that wouldn't be welcome too, but I think when they're describing a process of adopting S3, that applying experiments to the work would be the primary frame to put on that.
Absolutely. Yeah, because I feel like S3 in general assumes there's a group of people that want to achieve a specific goal. And then on top of that, we bring in all the patterns is my assumption. Um, and the next one is continuous improvement for work process. Introduce the principles of consent and navigate via tensions. But what they're saying is once the experiment has started, then use this. But I think tensions are like requirements for drivers. So even before the experiment goes into action, I still think tensions are really important and we need to start from there. But again, that's my perspective. Uh, Consider selecting a facilitator to guide group process and choose values to guide behavior. I think Nori went through a session where we talked about values, and one of the example given was like Amazon's values. So values almost seem like something we fall back on to resolve uh, something that we are not sure of. So that is the second one. Third one is initiate a process of continuous improvement. So they suggest Kanban and retrospectives, but we can initiate any process that makes sense to us as a group. And these are like pretty good ways to do it. But if there are other ways of doing it, I think those should be experimented with as well. Members of the team pull S3 patterns. So first we identify tensions, and then based on those tensions, we pull like it could be like any member of the group, they can actually pull a specific pattern and say, hey, this pattern makes sense to resolve this tension. So that's my understanding of this. And once we have that in place, we create a driver, and the driver basically like solidifies a statement saying, hey, we are trying this process to resolve this tension. If valuable, iteratively expand the scope of the experiments to other teams. So when we start off, I think we start with a boundary of these are the people that are going to try the experiment. And if the experiment works out for that group, we just expand the boundary and see how that specific experiment works with two different teams, like one big team at this point in time. The boundary has expanded, and see how like the team communication happens as well when this experiment is taking place. And last one is intentionally look out for impediment/waste. And we have a whole other slide for waste because I think it's extremely important. Uh, and since we have been doing the S3 stuff for quite a bit now at ODIN, I think looking at waste is an important aspect that we all need to like consider. Waste and continuous improvement. Waste is anything that is unnecessary for or standing in the way of a more effective response to a driver. So waste exists in various forms. It could be a task, it could be a process, it could be an organizational structure, mental models, whatever it is. Anything you can think of that is not helping in effectively responding to the driver. So establishing a process for the ongoing elimination of waste enables natural evolution of an organization towards greater effectiveness and adaptation to changing context. So I think elimination of waste is a very important aspect if we intend to compete with centralized organizations. If we don't eliminate waste, I think uh, it'll just we will not be able to be effective and actually compete with other organizations where there is like a hierarchical structure. So when it comes to eliminating waste, how should the waste elimination process be designed? Because the S3 patterns don't mention anything about how they should be designed, how the waste elimination patterns. So this is still like an open question that the individual group needs to figure out. And the last one is it a part of the driver? Should the waste elimination process be a part of the driver deciding on like a process of elimination of waste? Uh,
It is like a
and
special case of tension, Harsha.
it
Um,
is, it is
we're,
definitely
we're
is. Yeah.
wasting time, doing too much meetings. Let's
Hmm.
do less meetings. Can we consent to that?
Absolutely. Yeah,
That'd be the
exactly.
super minimal, oversimplified example of that.
No, but I think the more important thing is the process of eliminating waste. So how do we do this? So the example that you brought up, we are having too many meetings. So where do you bring this up? Is there a process to decide whether a specific thing is waste or not? And yeah, that process I think is a pretty important part of the improvement process. And for me, I think elimination of waste should be a part of the driver. Maybe not a part of the driver, but um, with the driver, I still. So initially, like when I thought about it, I almost thought a driver was a proposal, but it's not a proposal. It's just a statement. Driver is just a statement. Um, So where do we put in the elimination process is, I think, maybe not with the driver. Uh, yeah, so this is something that I'm also not clear on, but I am open to thoughts. So that's all there is in for bringing in S3. Now we are open for any questions, any discussions, any clarifications required.
On your last slide, when we get into our presentation about meeting formats, I think we'll
Mhm,
find that one of those meeting formats shows us a natural home for bringing up waste elimination. And rather than making a process, which
mhm.
arguably could be a new form of waste, instead of making a process for waste elimination, um, S3 already has a very simple process for it.
Okay, beautiful,
The
beautiful.
description of consent process is very detailed, but doing consent process in the context of someone raising attention saying, I don't like wasting my time doing this. I want to achieve the driver would be a good default way, to, I think, to think
Mhm.
about waste elimination
Yeah,
because of
yeah,
effectiveness.
yeah, yeah. I completely agree. If like designing a process itself is like a waste, then it should absolutely be dumped. Yeah, I completely agree.
All right, let's close down now, and we will thank you very much, Harsha.
Of course, yeah.